Hey everyone, welcome to Shiloh Ranch Church. At Shiloh Ranch, we have a lot of activities constantly going on. We have what's called the 1017 Project, which supplies food to families in need. We have the Firewood Project in the winter, which supplies firewood to families in need. We have amazing worship and scripture-based sermons every single Sunday, and we have an awesome team that you will get to meet along the way. But without further ado, let's head into the service.
Good morning, Shiloh Ranch Church Online. I have Wesley Winks here with me for the second week in a row. Wesley, how are you?
I'm good. The fans just wanted me back, so here I am.
They spoke, specifically Wesley did?
Yep, it was me. And they said, man, we got to get that guy with the ripped jeans back.
Yeah.
So here I am. I'm doing great.
Sunday morning. So we've got worship. We've got Joe Pearson back for week 2 of his series. I loved last week's sermon. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Then we've got, some cool videos sprinkled in throughout. Please reach out to the prayer team on the online platform if you would like to get prayed for. Human people come here on Sunday mornings specifically to pray with you. So all you have to do is click the request prayer button. You get put into a separate chat room and just talk, share your heart, pray with each other. If you want to support Shiloh and tithe and so on, you can go to our app, Shiloh Ranch Church. You can download that on wherever you get apps. It's super easy. You can also go to our website, shilohranch.com, the same process. And then we also have a P.O. box if you want to send a physical check. And the address will pop up here. It's eluding me now.
You ever had to send a physical check somewhere?
Have I?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. Have you?
No.
Yeah, I bought a gun stock from somebody in Illinois or something. It was super sketchy, but it worked. So that's the plan for the day, Wesley.
I'm excited. Sun's coming out. Beautiful day.
Beautiful day.
Come on.
Jordan and I will be here live on Facebook to talk about the sermon and to talk about any kind of questions you have. So please write down questions and ask us. So we'll be here at 8 p.m. Sunday night tonight.
On Facebook.
That's pretty much all I got for now. So let's go into worship, and then we'll be back here to talk about the sermon before that. So we'll see you guys then.
Fountain I drink from, oh yes, my soul.
when the night is holding on to me. I know that God is holding on.
One of the things I hope we really push here at Shiloh is giving. I will always push giving, and it's because it's not a rule. We're not saying give because you're supposed to. It is, we want generosity to be one of the fruits that is produced in our lives. I want to make sure that I've always got freedom from my dependence on whatever resources God's brought into my life. I want to be able to come in and go as easy. And so giving is always going to be a big part of our culture. Giving is always going to be something that we reference. The entire 1017 project was based in giving from Shiloh. 70,000 pounds of hamburger last month. I mean, it's a big part of our culture because of what it says about our dependence on God, the trust that he is active and working in our lives, he's engaged, and that giving is something that we want to see reflected in our culture. You can send mail to P.O. Box 177, Powell, Butte, Oregon. Do you know that I know the guy who is Powell, Butte, P.O. Box 1? True story. Powell, Butte, Oregon, 97753. You can click the giving tab that'll pop up online. You can go to shilohranch.com. The giving will pop. There's 1,000 ways for you to say yes. And I will tell you this, it is so much easier to go, oh, it's confusing. Oh, you know it's not that hard. We are without excuse, and we want to invite you to join us.
All right, we're back, and we're about to go into the sermon. What do you know about Joe?
Well, I know he's a sweetie pie.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure how he feels about me calling him that. But, he's fun. He's here on, when he's here on Sundays, he's very jovial, fun to be around. I like Joe.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite people. So Joe is back for part 2 of his sermon. You can find part 1 on YouTube. Also, the podcast app, if you just want to listen to it audibly. Shiloh Ranch Church on both podcast platforms and YouTube, if you want to watch part 1. Please take notes about the sermon. I will be also, so that we can talk about it tonight at 8 p.m. on Facebook. And that's about it. Keep it short. Let's go right into the sermon.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or as Jordan says, whatever time you're watching this, I don't even know. But I just want you to know that it's an honor to speak to you. Last week, I shared about interruptions, being interrupted and adjustable. Today, I want to talk to you about detours with a purpose. I'm going to use the same dude, though, Paul the Apostle, because he's like one of my heroes. I was on this Memorial Day. We look back. It's Memorial Weekend. Tomorrow's Memorial Day. We look back on the men and women who have died in winning our freedom. I always watch shows like Saving Private Ryan, and there was a scene at the end of Saving Private Ryan where Jim Ryan, who was the guy that a band of soldiers saved, but they all died. He's in Arlington National Cemetery now as an old man, and he's kneeling down by the grave, and he gets up and he asks his wife, have I been a good man? I just like, oh, that's so moving, because he knew that he needed to earn this life that he had been given. And in some ways, I think it's healthy that settles on us a little bit to understand the freedom that we've been given should be not carelessly cast away or carelessly treated. I think we should do a good job of maintaining it. All that to say is, I hope you have a meaningful Memorial Day weekend and look back on people who have done so much for you and for me. Paul the Apostle was a guy who did so much for us as believers, because he plowed new ground. He planted churches all through that world, all the way to Rome, and gave his life for the gospel, but in the meantime was spreading the truth about who Jesus was. And last week we talked about how he was interrupted by the slave girl, remember? And he had to cast the demon out of her. Even though she was saying true things, it was an interruption. It ultimately resulted in the jailer and his family being saved, which is really cool. Now, that adjustment and that interruption led to good things because God was in charge of things. And so here we are again. Paul the apostle is on a ship. Now, in Acts 26, he gets in trouble and he is a prisoner. He's getting ready to set sail to Rome. He has to stand before Caesar because he is a Roman citizen. And he demanded this audience with Caesar. And so in chapter 27, you have this horrible storm that takes place. It's like 3 weeks long, or I don't know, it's a long time, maybe 2 weeks, but it was just a vicious time. They were 14 days without food because they were all so sick, and the ship was breaking up. And Paul said, we're all going to be saved because God is wanting me to stand before, and he has promised me and appeared to me in a vision that I am not going to die, and none of the people on the ship are. So he gave him instructions. If you can swim for shore when we hit ground. And if you can't swim, grab a piece of the broken up ship. And God will provide for you and protect you. It's like, oh man, it's like the scariest story. I don't like water that well. And I'm just like, I'm not a very good swimmer. Almost drowned once. And so it's very difficult for me to imagine this kind of moment. So here they are, and the ship wrecks. Paul the apostle, planted all these churches and was so committed. I was in Turkey 5 years ago and on a trip with a bunch of young leaders, and we uncovered I went to a mosque where they were uncovering the plaster in the mosque, because before it turned into a mosque, it was a early church in the 600s, and there was a mosaic that was being uncovered. They covered up the mosaics with plaster for their mosque, and what they ended up doing is preserving the mosaics underneath. And here's this picture of Paul the apostle standing there, and it was just a kind of a rickety old dude and bald-headed, which I'm proud of, but he was standing there, and it's a picture of Paul the apostle, and it was just a moment where I thought, wow, this guy has given so much. Well, this is a story about him in quite a moment. He was on this ship heading ended up to be house prison in Rome, stand before Caesar. But before he got there, this wreck takes place. I want to talk to you today about detours with a purpose. We were interrupted last week and interruptions with adjustments. And today I want to talk about detours with a purpose. And Paul was on this ship heading to Rome, and he got in a wreck. And they ran aground in the island of Malta. Verse 1 through 10 in Acts 28. Here it is. Once safely on shore, we found out the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all. Because it was raining and cold, Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper driven out by the heat fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. And the people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead. But after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said, well, he was a god. Now, it's kind of fickle, isn't it? People are either a murderer or you're a god, depending on your circumstances. We'll get into this in a minute. Now, there was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island, and he welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. And his father was sick in bed and suffering from fever and dysentery. And Paul went in to see him, and after prayer placed his hands on him and healed him. And when this happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. And they honored us in many ways. And when they were ready to sail, they furnished us with supplies that we needed. I want you to catch a glimpse of what this detour was like for Paul. He was on his way to get this settled once and for all. He was a Roman citizen that was mistreated. He's standing before Caesar to plead his case. But he's He's run aground for 3 months. A very difficult thing to happen. So I just want to let you know our journeys are difficult sometimes. And sometimes they're detours. And sometimes people think that God doesn't love you if something bad happens to you, or there's something wrong in your life, or if you just lived right, things would go better for you. I want to just challenge that today a little bit, because I think that's really wrong thinking. It's in the church a lot. I wished it wasn't, but I think it's in humans a lot. And humans are in church, so it's in church. We had a family come to our town in Montana when we were first pastoring the church, the Workmans, wonderful people. Mark ended up leading the ministry as a great preacher and teacher. And they had 2 boys, and one of them, named Dylan, had a birth defect on one arm. It was like his arm was, the elbow went the other way. It was like backwards. And he only had 3 fingers. And he had these 2 and a thumb. And they're a very fun-loving family. And Dylan was an amazing athlete. In fact, in high school, he was a wrestler, and then very, very, very good athlete in football. Went to college and played football on a scholarship. Big guy. But when he was a little kid, he was so funny because he would run around and had this little arm that he could wheel around the back of his head and put his hand on top of his head, and he would make his finger talk like it was a puppet. And he was just the cutest little dude. He'd go, aardvark, and he'd start talking with his little finger. And everybody would laugh at him. And I talked to Mark. I said, this kid is great. And Mark says, oh, he's hilarious. We throw him in the pool, and we just watch him swim in circles. Holy cow. How can you be so cavalier with this injury? And I started to talk to Mark about this, and Mark says, well, we came from a church before we landed here. And when he was first born, they had these, this defect. There were people in the church that said there must be sin in your guys' life for this to take place in your son. And we were so devastated and hurt. We were new Christians. We didn't know any different. So we thought maybe we should just search God and ask if there's something wrong with us. And they ended up leaving that group, which I'm so glad they did. But this is what happens when we equate smooth sailing with God's love, and things that are difficult, like a storm or a wreck or a deformed arm or anything, we start equating that with bad living. Then we're missing the whole point. See, this is where Paul the Apostle gathered around the fire, and I'm really proud of him. He went up and helped gather wood. He got wood on there, and he would reach down and adjust one of the logs, and a snake comes out driven by the fire and fastens himself to his hand. And they said, oh, he must be a murderer. Something bad just happened to him. And they waited for him to die. And then he didn't die, and they said, oh, he must be a god. This is not thinking of a mature person who knows who God is. So let's not let that permeate into our life, that if everything's running smooth, we should say, oh, God is smiling on me today. And if everything's rough, that God is frowning on me today. He loves you both directions, both ways, both circumstances. His love is bigger than your circumstance. And he penetrates beyond the surface stuff. Wrecks happen to good people. And Paul the Apostle was on a wreck. And he was a good guy. And there he is, landed shipwrecked. And they're gathered around the fire. And it's just an interesting situation. I wish I could slow down. If I could do anything over again in my life now that I'm 64, as I read Scripture, I think I would like to slow down and just meditate on it and slow down. And let's slow this down here, because the people are all gathered around. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, verse 4, they said to each other, this man must be a murderer, for even though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live. But Paul shook the snake off in the fire and suffered no ill effects. And the people expected him to swell up or fall dead. But after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual, happened to him. They changed their minds and said he was a god. Now, Paul was, when he healed people earlier, in fact, I think it was Acts 6 or 7, somewhere in there. I don't know. I can't remember, but they accused him and Barnabas of being gods because they would do healings. And they ripped their clothes and said, we're men just like you. Paul didn't do that here. He just let it ride. You know why? Because this was not a religious island. This was an island of superstition. They were just needed to have some understanding that Paul was a credible carrier of the gospel. And as they're standing around the fire, they couldn't tell who was a prisoner and who was a guard. Storms are great equalizers. That's what I wanted to tell you, that on a detour and a tough, difficult time is a great equalizer. It puts everybody on the same plane, and all of a sudden we kind of like get humble before God and say, "Oh, this is." You know, I remember. Do you remember? I'm sure you do if you're old enough. 9/11, when all of the Democrats in the Senate and all the Republicans in the Senate stood on the steps of the Capitol, linking arms, singing "God Bless America" together. It's amazing what a great equalizer it was when we were attacked and we went through that difficult, hard time. It was a great equalizer for all of us to just realize that we're Americans. We just love freedom together. You know, I just wish that we could live there. Well, Paul the Apostle standing around the fire, they didn't know if he was a prisoner or if he was a guard or one of the sailors. He was just a guy. And a snake bit him. He said, well, must be a bad guy. I think our judgment is so quick to come to the surface still. I would love to see us mature in that. So our journey has wrecks in it. And our detours have purpose. I just want to talk to you about that today, because the purpose of this detour was that the island would know who Jesus is. It's like, what lengths God will go to. This man who had given his life to serve God and was flogged and beaten a few chapters back, and last week we talked about it and how he had committed so strongly to the gospel and went into prison, and wherever he went he sang praises. He was living a good life for God. He was honoring God, and now he's on a ship heading to Rome to get some stuff straightened out about his Roman citizenship, and he's on this wreck, this massive wreck. Detours have purpose. So let's just rest in the fact that we don't have to make a judgment of sin in our life or if we're holy. We're not, unless we understand. I had one occasion where I had to ask somebody to leave the church. It's a hard thing to do. I was in Montana at that time, and one of our guiding values is to be free of judgment and manipulation and not allow people to condemn other people. It's really important. It's really important to us that we don't tell people what's wrong with them, that we let the Holy Spirit do that. And I would preach that on a regular basis, that we're not the Holy Spirit. He does a really good job of convicting people and helping people. So it's not right of us to make a judgment about somebody and let them know. Now, there's times when someone asks us advice and we can speak into their life and we can let them know and give them some correction and gentle help. There's no doubt there's that. It's called discipleship and mentoring and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what this gal was doing. We had a drummer, okay, and she was awesome. The drummer was good. I asked her to come up. She played in high school, and she came to church with an AC/DC shirt on, played drums, and she was really good. Had the big hair and everything to go with it, and the lady pulled me aside from after church, said, I think we should tell her not to wear that T-shirt when she's drumming. And I just kind of, I think I'd like her to decide that. And she goes, no, I think she needs to be approached and told not to wear that AC/DC shirt when she's drumming. AC/DC was, for those of you who don't know, they're not the Bill Gaither band. They're somebody different. Not a Christian band. Well, here's the scoop. I thought I got a little smart alecky. I was young. Young people get smart alecky. I kind of did. And I just go, here's an idea, Julie. How about let's make a list on what people should wear to church? And I said we could just put it on the bulletin board, and then they could go and look at it and see what is appropriate attire. I thought that she would, get that. And she goes, that's a good idea. I was like, oh, shoot. She didn't. That's actually what she thought. She thought that's where people would grow and they would learn. And it's like, no, it's judgment. It's not the right thing. And it's like what the people were saying when Paul the Apostle got bit by a snake. Well, it got worse and worse, and she started to write letters to people, and people would come to church and they'd become a new believer, and she would bother them. And one young guy was engaged to another girl, and I came around the corner and I found her with her finger in his chest, and she was telling him not to be engaged to this girl because it was not a good marriage. It wouldn't work. And she was giving him all kinds of grief. And I stopped it. Anything that makes me mad is that. Because she was throwing all that judgment on him. So we had to... It got worse. And I was standing in the church with a cup of coffee. And she came in the door about 25 feet away. And she was so mad at me because I had confronted her about what she had done. She had this big, huge Bible, big Bible. And she took it and threw it at me. And I remember this Bible rotating in the air, coming at me full steam, and I just lifted my arm up with my coffee, and the Bible went whoosh, right underneath. And it didn't hit me and didn't spill my coffee. It just got so bad that I had one of my most gentle elders get up in front of church and said, New Song Church is a family, and we need to somehow take care of some family business. We're asking her to leave and not come anymore, and we want her to go find another place of fellowship. Very hard thing to do. Only one time I've ever had to do it. But see, we can't allow this judgment that takes place, this mindset that if something bad is going on in your life, that the devil is all about it, or if something good is happening in your life, then you're following God. See, this is what took place around that fire when Paul was bit by the snake. In fact, he shook it off into the fire. Sometimes when we get offended or when we see some things that need to be different, we see them all the time. We need to shake it off. Shake it off. I had my daughter's oldest daughter, my first granddaughter, she would fall down, and her parents, instead of they would go to her and say, Emerson, shake it off. And so she gets so cute. When she'd trip and fall and she'd hurt herself, she'd jump up and she'd just start shaking things off. It's like, and the pain went away. I'm not trying to advocate shaking around. There's some weird churches that do a lot of that. But I just wanted to let you know that when you have a situation, you need to shake it off. You can't be packing around a wound or something that happened to you that you think is bad, and so you don't think it's a God thing. You think the devil did it to you. Can I just tell you, shake it off in the fire. Paul the Apostle shook it off, and the snake went back into the fire, and he just kept standing there getting warm and plowed ahead. And the ministry of the gospel and the truth of who Jesus is was spread throughout that island. And if we stop, and if we take these moments where we're like, oh, your son was born with a deformity, or